I mean, my accusers in this case talked about their lived experience, and talked about me not having a lived experience. Well, everybody's got a lived experience, and it's subjective to a certain extent.
Thank you so much, Sean, for joining me on the podcast. So this podcast is a little bit different to the ones that we've done so far. Usually we've been interviewing, I guess, writers and commentators and academics and so on that are thinking very deeply and specifically on race and racism. But I really wanted to speak to you because you also think very deeply on these subjects, but actually very recently, or at least over the last couple of years, you've had a particular case which is, I think, almost become a focal point of many of the discussions we have at the Equianopod project and many of the problems that we raise awareness of around the direction of travel of contemporary anti-racism. And so I don't want to put words in your mouth. I guess I want to get straight into it. Firstly, it would just be useful if you just give us a bit of a quick and terse introduction about yourself and who you are. And then I think it would be good to talk about how we first came into contact and why you're sitting here today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Anaya. Sean Corby, I have worked most of my life as a musician, professional musician, a trumpet player in London, UK, where I moved in 1991 to attend Royal Academy of Music and study jazz. I went on to be a touring recording musician with many different artists, but lots of great Jamaican reggae artists such as Gregor Isaacs and Dennis Brown, people like Keziah Jones, Thai, UK hip-hop artists, the Jazz Warriors, that was a pretty seminal UK jazz ensemble started by Courtney Pine. I played with them, Jazz Jamaica, etc., etc. So, Hugh Masekela, all sorts of people. So, I did that for many years and was devoted to that, and then moved into education, arts education, including some black-led organisations such as Tomorrow's Warriors, where I was their first education officer and developed.
What's Tomorrow's Warriors?
Tomorrow's Warriors is an organisation that was founded for the professional development of young jazz musicians, specifically young black jazz musicians and those from more working class backgrounds, by Gary Crosby and his partner Janine Irons. They came out of the Jazz Warriors movement, and then that was more of a development organisation. And I worked with them as their education officer, starting to expand the scope of the work that the organisation did. I went on to work at the Roundhouse when the Roundhouse work reopened in 2008, I think that was, when I worked on their music manifesto programme in education stuff for young people, and a variety of other roles in education at various organisations. And then I ended up at ACAS after moving back up north in 2016 and selling my trumpets and my record collection and vowing that I'd never play music again, which has come back to bite me actually, but that's another story. But yeah, at the moment I'm still working for ACAS, where I'm a conciliator, a consigliere, somebody who negotiates settlements between employees and employer over pay disputes mostly. And I've been at ACAS since 2018.
So thank you for that introduction, Sean. So I mean, you've obviously from what you've told me and the conversations we've had over the years, you're someone that is a creative, very culturally, socially and politically aware, really interested in the creative the creations musically and culturally of particularly people of African heritage, and to me this is from our conversations, you are an example of the joys and the real positive example of what diversity means in its true sense, what multiculturalism means in its true sense, where different perspectives, different experiences come together to create something new that appreciates one another, that doesn't just see people solely for their differences, but recognizes what's valuable and interesting about our differences and what we can share. And so I think that's a really good starting point. So let's then take that to the next question, which is how has your experiences shaped your views on race and identity?
There's layers and layers to this. Starting at the beginning, from actually being very young, as in like 8, 9 of the first memories that I've got of being sort of conscious of culture and music of let's say African descent. In my life, it started with school. Being at school, I went to a Catholic school, right? Catholic primary school in Huddersfield, and my mother's Irish immigrant, and nearly all of us at primary school and then throughout secondary school, none of us would say that, and this wasn't, obviously we weren't politically aware, but none of us would have said we were English. We were whatever our parents were. So I might have said I'm Irish, but we were Italian, we were Polish, West Indian, Mauritian, Ghanaian, few other Portuguese, different things, but hardly any of us said, "Oh, we're English." And there was a kind of sense of this is a word that I've picked up more recently, but kind of otherness. We were sort of we knew it was something a little bit different with us, as having a religion as a focus, etc., etc. But I think there I had friends whose parents were from Jamaica and Carriacou, Grenada, Trinidad, St. Vincent, Ghana, and they were my friends, and I started to go out to social events and parties and weddings and all sorts in this environment that was a West Indian environment, and I really liked it. And at home, my dad would play a lot of music, right? A lot of soul music, a lot of blues, Chicago blues, and some jazz, things like Jimmy Smith and stuff like that. And for some reason, he made me really aware that there was a historical and like a cultural context to that music, and that it should be respected and I guess in some ways deferred to, and that it was black music. And he started to kind of tell me a little bit about how it had been exploited, etc., etc. Now I'm talking here being like 9, 10-year-old, that I was starting to get a grasp on some of this stuff. And I'm aware that this opens me up to all sorts of maybe, different kinds of name calling or criticism or whatever, but I'm just being straight with you when we talk tonight. But I had this kind of drawn to, let's say, that music and that culture and my friends, and just felt part of it for whatever reason. And it really started there, and then grew through my interest, particularly in music. As I got into secondary school, through friendships, and then through like my first girlfriend, just like school romance, 13, 14 or whatever, just, holding hands and a kiss behind the bike shed type stuff. But my first girlfriend, her mum and dad from Grenada, and that was the first time that something, I became aware of a couple of different things. She said that her dad had told her never to bring a white man home. So we weren't allowed to go to a house. We had to go out and sort of be in secret. My mum and dad were just like cool. It never even like, it's whatever. Just not, there was never any kind of discriminatory or racist talk in my house at all, ever, from my parents. It just wasn't there. But then I started experiencing some ostracising from friends, and I had like white friends, black friends at school, and then so abuse started mainly from like a group of older boys. And at the time, you're talking about mid-1980s. there was a very significant and visible black presence in Huddersfield at the time. Different generations down to ours, from people that had come in late 50s, and 1960s, etc. But even in the town centre, it was there, and it was just part of life. But there was also at that time a very present British movement, National Front, etc. Bulldog would try to sell papers outside our school, didn't get very far with that. There was a whole football kind of culture that was going on there, where boys at my school were going to football matches and forming into, I suppose, what we now call gangs and things. And a lot of that was very heavily influenced at the time by far-right thinking. So abuse started, physical abuse, name-calling, the whole thing. And then in my area that I lived, from being about 8, we moved to a different area I was about 9 years old. My best friend from Jamaican family, around there, there weren't many black families in the area, and we'd get grief over our friendship. So that was kind of my introduction to race being present in my life in Aya, and it's gone from there, I would say.
No, that's really helpful as a kind of picture that, you a working class, diverse community in the north of England, and you saw, the real racism, from that era in the 80s, from organised racist groups like the National Front, but also certain divisions within communities, and people saying things from the black community, and other kinds of communities, but you despite all that context, you didn't want to play into those narratives, and you chose to actually follow what you were passionate about, and what you were drawn to, and that for you transcended racial boundaries. And I think that is a really important story, because I think a lot of the time, particularly in the contemporary discussion, when we hear about quote unquote white working class people, I think there's this painting of them as bigoted, and backwards, when in reality there was many white working class people, if we're going to use that phraseology, were fighting the National Front, in the latter part of the 20th century, were standing with their black and Asian brothers and sisters against racism. And actually that story, I think, is not told enough when we're talking about the history of how changes happened on that issue. Okay, so fast forward to the present day. So you're obviously someone, as you said, that you come from this context, very aware of the kinds of discussions and divisions and conversations that are going on around race, and where you stand in all of that. And you find yourself in a you find yourself in 2020, race has become a really big discussion in the UK, and you have a particular stance. You feel concerned about what the general narrative about race and racism. Just if you could just talk a bit more about that in terms of what you thought in 2020, and what your general response to that was.
Yeah, I mean, in essence, my experience has been that I became more and more aware that racial bigotry, racial prejudice, is something. I mean, I was listening to Chloe Valdari speaking with Jordan Peterson, right? Two things from that. Firstly, that I'm really into this.
Oh, she's coming on the podcast next week.
Great. The thing about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and the shadow, and that's really interesting, right? That both are kind of necessary from a psychological point of view. She talks about it. But then there's this thing, the way that her and John Peterson, I think, agree that that racial bigotry and otherness, the other, is a human thing. It's something that can exist in all people. And it was a long time since I've read it, but Paul Gilroy, in when he talks about the allure of race, etc., and there's a passage that he talks about how we know that the oppressed can become the oppressor, and there's vengeance, and all of these kind of things. And there's a certain kind of narrative that says, well, black people can't be racist because they don't have any power. I mean, it's something that I've been hearing for many, many years. They say that. Now you're starting to get into discussions then about distribution of power, etc., etc. Certain manifestations of racial bigotry and racial prejudice, and then we have to get into talks about class and money and why these things were done for battering over resources and money, etc., etc. But fundamentally, I've learned that the filter that we see people in terms of race and the judgments that we make about them, and that we like or don't like groups of people based on that, is something that is present in some white people, it's present in some black people, etc., etc. And I've just seen lots and lots of examples of that, and experienced it myself from just harmless things to things that are actually abusive and discriminatory. Okay, so that's the experience and that's the essence I'm coming from. Also coming from reading lots of stuff, because when we talk about, my accusers in this case talked about their lived experience, and talked about me not having a lived experience. Well, everybody's got a lived experience, and it's subjective to a certain extent. So you can say, well, this is how I see things, this is what I've experienced, this is how I interpret it, but I want to gather some knowledge, which means you're taking information from other people's experience as well, weighing it up with yours, etc., and getting some kind of both intellectual and other kind of context to where we're at. So in 2020, I'm there with all of this, right? And during the lockdown, Black Lives Matter thing, let's say, exploded into consciousness, and after what happened to George Floyd, what was done to George Floyd, and I started to notice at work that there was more and more talking at us about this from management and from others who were in positions to be allowed to talk at us. And it was all coming from one perspective, and that was that black people are and always have been the victims of racism and bigotry, and white people are guilty of that. And white people especially need to be re-educated to put that right. And I also started to see how you spoke earlier about, let's just say, white working class. We grew up in environments that I think the most, let's just say, mixing of different people went on. We lived together, and at the time, particularly Pakistani guys, Sikh guys, were kind of outside of all of that, and that changed probably in the late 80s as well, and 90s. So because we wouldn't have known, I never knew any Pakistani or Indian guys as a kid, partly because of the school I went to, would have been Catholic, so that was the only group that I didn't know. But also, still in those days, the kind of social lives that we had that revolved about going out and clubbing or playing football or whatever, those guys weren't there. But a lot of my friends did grow up side by side, so they all came in then, and we were all kind of mixing together. So, but there's been a lot of grief. That has not been rosy at all, and a lot of white working class people have been guilty of some terrible abusive things and what have you. But we can also look at that as saying, well, those boys, just like boys that gravitate towards Nation of Islam or to gangs or whatever, are actually being exploited by certain nefarious powers, I believe, right? So I saw this, and we then had this kind of what I'd describe as, and I might end up getting put right on this and being challenged on how I describe it, a kind of bourgeois white middle class establishment, mostly in the managerial class, that I'd wager mostly, compared to our upbringing and our experience, and certainly I know from my own, I probably have very little interaction with black people. Obviously, that's not the case all the time, but generally speaking. And all of a sudden, that they've gone from their cause de celeb being issues around sexuality, etc., and trans ideology and whatever else that I make no comment on, to race. And suddenly they're pointing at me and other white working class people, etc., and have the gall also to point at black people who don't subscribe to certain views, and start suddenly telling us that they know what's what, and they're going to tell us how it is.
So tell us step by step. So you've given us the kind of broad context, and I think it would be really useful to say step by step. So what happened? Because some people may not have that are listening to this may not have seen it in the news, but I think it's really important for everybody to know exactly what happened, because I think it really illustrates a really important problem. So to take us step by step, what happened to you, and
thank you. In August 2021, I returned to work after being ill, and my line manager, who I had a good working relationship with, told me that she'd been instructed to tell me to remove 8 posts that I'd made on Yammer, which is like our internal intranet. And there are various categories in there.
What's an intranet? So I don't. So that's like a private workspace platform.
Yeah, an internal online news bulletin. You share information. There are groups on there. People share things about employment law, stuff that affects all of us at work, etc. And then there are various groups. There's a running group you can go on and talk about, and there's a diversity and inclusion group that's got lots and lots of members. And I posted on there, and I posted on the all organisation section of it, because in the diversity and inclusion section, we were invited to join in the conversation about race and equality, etc., and with a view that it can be fed up to the policymakers and the leadership. And also, because almost on a daily basis, we're sent, either be it from the chief executive or from internal communications, etc., all this information about certain issues. I was seeing this, and I posted some articles that I thought may help people to see that there is another way of looking at some of these issues, and there are other schools of thought.
So what were some of the things that had been posted already? So what were some of the things that you'd seen that
already were all like celebrations of Black Lives Matter, reading lists that included like white fragility and Akela and all like lots of other stuff along those lines. I've worked in the training team as well, where they deliver courses about equality and diversity, and some of it's really good stuff about the law. But then I'd noticed that can, on occasion, be used by trainers with a particular political leaning as a platform to share things that is contentious, but they're teaching it as fact, etc., right? Unconscious bias and all of this. So I'm seeing this over a period of time. Now, at certain points, I sent information to the chief executive, the Race Network, and a couple of other people that were important in terms of our internal diversity policies, but also people might not know that one of the roles of ACAS is to inform workplace practice and policy, right up to employment tribunal level, and this, it's a government department, right? And I sent information just saying, look, you might want to have a think about some of these ideas. So I sent a link to Theory of Enchantment, and I said nothing is beyond criticism, but this is something that you might want to think about because it's based in a different way of looking at things, etc. But anyway, I ended up posting these posts with the purpose of informing my colleagues who may not be aware of certain issues that there's other ways of looking at things, but also to challenge those in the race network, etc., who were pushing one particular narrative, one angle, and also hoping that the people at the top of the organisation would consider, okay, there is a different way of looking at this. Let's look at what that might be. And we're going to go back to the race network and sort of say, well, you've only been feeding us one way of looking at this, but we've seen this. Let's talk about it. And those posts included a link to a biography of Howard Thurman, right? And I wrote a comment saying he railed against separation and segregation. And a link to, and I described him as being a theologian, a mystic, and a civil rights pioneer. And a link to a bio and a photo of him. I posted a wonderful article by you about free speech that was erudite and not at all, there's nothing that you could construe in there as being any indication that either you or me are racists of the far right. That went up. That was one of the things that I was told to take down. I put a quote by Ada Akpala, who I've got like loads of admiration for, and in it, it was a photo of Ada. It was a meme that I downloaded, and it said, "Truth and belonging can be incompatible," something like that, right? And I said, you know, when somebody says exactly what you're thinking, but better than you can, Aisha is that person for me. So I said that. I was told that goes. There was an article about white working class boys not doing very well at school on the BBC, hardly a bastion of far right thinking. I was told to take that down, and the reason for me posting that was because I thought, and I'd said I'm glad that this looks to be addressed now. If white working class boys are doing badly at school, it stands to reason to me, possibly, that they might not be doing that well in the workplace either. And that's something of concern for ACAS because we deal with workplace matters, etc. So to take that down. And others. So I was told, these, take them down. Why? We don't know. Can't tell you. Who told you to tell me to take them down? The head of diversity and the kind of second most senior person in the organisation, I think, to the CEO, have said, boom, they're going down. So I did straight away because whilst I went on to argue in my corner, I realised that possibly to disobey a direct instruction like that may well have meant that I'd be instantly dismissed for gross misconduct or something. So I took them down, and I could not for the life in me understand why. When I looked at those posts, it was like, I'm not going to write anything that could be in any way discriminatory, etc., etc. anyway. I know that I'm confident enough in myself to know that I'm not going to do that. Definitely not going to do it deliberately. And those posts are not that. Then considerable time went by when I was pretty much pleading for information. What's happening? Why has this happened? What's going to happen to me? You know, am I losing my job? My wife's here.
Well, why did you think that you were going to lose your job after them just saying that asking you to take the post down?
These posts have to go down. We can't tell you why, but we're looking into it. There's been a complaint made, and it was immediately apparent that people right senior in the organisation were aware of this before me. Okay, yeah. So obviously this is something that's going on, and it's escalated right up to the top.
Yeah, and the process is kind of part of the punishment. That's the thing as well, that not giving you the answers. You know that something negative has happened against you. You're not given information. Yeah. No. Yeah. So continue.
Yeah, and then knowing what I know about conducting discipline and grievance process, I thought, well, this is not being done like it's meant to be, or how we teach people should do it. And then after a short while, I I knew that I needed to, I felt like I need some support here, and I spoke to Free Speech Union, and they backed me right from the start, Fraser Houghton, and because I just felt alone, and I thought the union, the PCS, one of the people that has accused me is very senior in the PCS, so I knew the PCS are not going to help me. I wasn't
So
a member
what
of
were you? Yeah. So at what point did you find out that you were accused of racism, essentially?
Yeah. I think it took about, I can't remember now, and obviously there's litigation going on at the minute, so discussing the specifics of the case and remembering everything, I don't have it all in front of me. But maybe a couple of weeks, like a significant period of time before it was disclosed to me, any details. And then what happened was, I was told that this grievance had been taken out on me by 4 colleagues, right? So it transpired then that ACAS have allowed this complaint to go to a formal grievance. So then I'm under investigation for a formal grievance. I wasn't suspended or anything, but it's a formal grievance. And then I see a statement that describes the complaint. Now, I was given excerpts of it and was never shown the entire thing. My union rep, Affinity, Emma Stopford, that stepped in and started to help me, requested it on numerous occasions, was told at times, we don't show the whole thing, it's part of the process, we don't show the thing. Then she was told, we're not showing him the whole thing because we think it'll be detrimental for his mental health. Because at this point, I was starting to struggle with like really severe anxiety, right? I've suffered with that over many, many years, and this was really kicking me into a seriously dark place.
And they knew this.
Yeah, they knew this. Yeah. And this conversation's gone on. My line manager expressed that she was really concerned about me, as in this could end up like really, really worried for my safety, my well-being, right? And she was right to be worried because I was in a bad way. And she was kind of told, well, he's going to have to wait to hear more. We're just going to have to wait. Anyway, I saw when he went forward to formal grievance, I was given a statement. And this statement was by 4 people. And I was told their names. And it was, I can only describe it as being unhinged. It was an absolutely vitriolic, vicious, hysterical statement that bore no correlation whatsoever for any rational thinking person to either the nature of the posts and certainly not to me. Now, these 4 people that made the complaint work in London. I work in Leeds. They never met me. They didn't know anything about me, apparently. Okay? They alleged that I was, based on these posts, a racist with a deep-rooted hatred of black people that organise into racialised organisations.
Anti-racism.
Yeah. That I was a danger to black colleagues. Apparently, I found out only when we went to court recently, they requested bodyguards, right? And the rest of it was just like unhinged, just madness. And I'm looking at this, and it turns out that I won't give the names, but they applied for an anonymity order, which was chucked out of the court the other week when we had the hearing as well. And I won't name names at this point, but one of them is a very, very senior person in PCS Union. She's a self-proclaimed activist, ethnocentric activist, supposedly an artist, and appears on the front of the Morning Star, The Guardian, etc., talking about race and racialised politics. And this was the spokesperson for the group. So this was somebody that should have been able to have some kind of understanding that what I'm saying is not far-right politics, you know. And this continued for, even though ACAS ended up dismissing the actual grievance, which they appealed, and they appealed it even after being told about a little bit about who I am and what my response was to because obviously I had to respond to the investigation, which meant disclosing my ideas, disclosing why I posted these things, explain my motivations behind that, how I understood the posts, what they were saying. Also then, even though I never lead with things about my background and my children and my wife, etc., etc., I won't lead with that because I think it's crass to do that in some ways, but it's relevant to say, look, this is who you're dealing with, you know. And they still appealed it. And to this day, I've never been allowed to put those posts up. I think that without the Free Speech Union and without your support and Emma Stopford and the people that have come in subsequently now, John Holbrook and Paul Maynard, who are representing me on a pro bono basis, they would have finished me, right? They would have got rid of me. I'd have been labelled a racist. They'd have all given themselves a round of applause and I'd have been ruined. And there has to be some kind of accountability for that.
So this process has been going on for more than a year now, and it's still ongoing. But you've recently, I mean, it is honestly shameful, to be honest. And I think, but you've had a recent victory. Could you just? It's still ongoing, but could you just tell us a bit about the recent victory that you've had?
Yeah, so I've taken out a discrimination and harassment claim against ACAS, and the hearing was a few weeks ago now in Leeds. It was scheduled for 4 days, and we had anticipated that would have been the discrimination and harassment hearing. Win, lose or draw, that would have been done with, and then we'd be looking at if liability was decided, we'd be looking at a remedy hearing further down the line possibly. But on the first day of the hearing, the judge informed us that she wanted, first of all, to ascertain as to whether I was protected under the Equality Act for philosophical belief. So that took us slightly by surprise. And ACAS, I think, had pretty much counted on getting it thrown out there because their argument was that all I've done is express opinions and views. They aren't anything to do with my philosophical belief, deeply held beliefs.
They're not deeply held, is what they were trying to argue. Yeah.
So there's the Granger test. So I had to go through the Granger test and satisfy each point of it. Now the fifth point is
what? Just quickly, what's the Granger test? Don't tell us all the points. Just what is it?
The Granger test is that there are 5 points that, in order for a belief to be protected under the Equality Act, that covers race, sex, gender reassignment, etc., etc. There's 5 points that have to be satisfied, right? The fifth is that your ideas, your beliefs, have to be worthy of respect in a democratic society. ACAS disputed that. They said that they weren't, right? Up until the morning of the hearing when they changed it to neutral. Okay? So I was intensely cross-examined for the whole day. The next day, the judge announced that she was satisfied that the views and opinions that I shared were a manifestation of my deeply held philosophical belief, and she issued the judgment, which should be available online. It's certainly in the public domain now, and her reasoning behind awarding it.
Well, so we'll put some links out, just to elaborate on the story from news reporting. But this is pretty landmark that I think it's criticism or opposition to critical race theory. I think that was the Times headline, is a protected philosophical belief under the Equality Act. And I think that was one of the reasons why you wanted to fight this, Sean, not obviously for yourself, which is a really important thing, but also to get protection for other people, to show to other organisations that they can't do this and they can't get away with it. And actually, this is a very important victory that you've received, which hopefully will strengthen other people who actually just have not extreme views, not shockingly provocative views, but actually just a humanistic liberal belief in the Martin Luther King basis for anti-racism, which is the content of your character, not the colour of your skin. And that's essentially what opposition to critical race theory is. And that's essentially where you were coming from
Yeah,
on these issues.
of course. In order to when I was being cross-examined, I had to demonstrate what my opposition was. And as I said, I spoke to Andrew Doyle the other night, and I said to him, it wasn't just about opposing Black Lives Matter or opposing critical race theory. It was about presenting an alternative, presenting another idea, right? So that's what I did, and that's what I had to demonstrate that my views and opinions came from. And you're quite right that I have genuinely, let's say, fought this little part of the battle here because I don't want other people to be. I don't want to be silenced and obfuscated. I don't want to allow these people that are absolutely dominating what people will think, what they will say, and ultimately then that pans out in how we form relationships and live alongside each other and live with each other. I don't want to see that happen because I think that a lot of the things that they're promoting are very corrosive and damaging and divisive. But I don't want to silence other people either. Those four complainants, I don't want to silence them. Like Gav Sad talks about, bring me your bad ideas and let me smash them. I love that. Bring them. Coleman News the other day. Yeah, let's debate because I'm always open to having my ideas changed. I don't think the same that I did 5 years ago, let alone when I was 16, 17 or whatever. And I often think to myself, what beliefs do I hold, that if I was to find out they were erroneous, would really rock my world? Because those are the beliefs that I need to recalibrate and constantly be checking whether the validity of them, the usefulness of them, etc. So I don't want to silence anybody, but people are terrified to speak out. I'm not. Now, I'm sort of, in some ways I was exactly the right person for them to pick on, but in some ways exactly the wrong person. And it's kind of a cosmic joke, as my dear best friend described it as being, of all people, to be labelled a racist and a fascist and a this and that and the other. I've been called a lot of things through my life, right? Never have I been called a racist and a fascist and far right by anybody, okay? So these guys that have done this, it's like, whoa, wrong guy. But I will fight the fight. So for myself and for others.
Well, I want to we're going to have to wrap up soon, but I
Okay.
wanted to say a few things. That firstly, and I've said it to you before, but I think it's important to say again that, just amazing to you for being such a courageous and inspiring person, and to take this forward, because undoubtedly it would not have been easy, and many people can't do it, and many people won't, just because, as you said earlier on, that it can be exhausting. It has a huge impact. So I want to say thank you for doing what you're doing, and I think
Thank you,
you've
and
had this victory, and it will
thank you.
help a lot of people, and I hope that you will get the justice that you deserve, and we stand by you at the Equianopod project, and we'll continue to
Thank
support
you.
you in whatever way we can. But just the other thing I just want to say is that I think it really is an example of this. There's still people in the mainstream discourse that basically say that these things aren't happening, that people, and actually this is happening, and it's not just to big, massive, high profile people. It's to, people that are working in all areas of life,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
are being, chastised, smeared for holding views that are not just mainstream, but actually morally right things
Yeah.
to think. It's
Absolutely.
not,
Yeah.
and I think that that's a really dangerous and worrying place for our society, where even defining debates about how we should respond to and think about these questions of race and racism, having a liberal, humanistic, universalistic view
Yeah.
is worthy of the kind of harassment that has happened. So I'm we'll continue to do what we can to push back against it. But thank you for your part in this, and congratulations for what you've achieved so far.
Thank you, and I'm really grateful. And you know that I've said it to you before, that I appreciate your support. And I took an interest in Equiano project before any of this happened, and open to the thinkers and the people that you've got on there. That some fantastic stuff, and I really appreciate it. And it is a kind of lonely road to walk, despite the fact that we know that there are many, many people out there that share our view, but that are just too scared to speak out. So just wanted to say, though, that I hope that people that perhaps aren't able to talk about the issues in the way that I'm able to, or don't have the kind of family background, etc., and experience that I've had, but I've come to the conclusion that they hold those, like you say, universalist, humanist ideas that you don't judge people on the colour of the skin. As my grandma Nancy used to say, there's good and bad in every, right? That's what she used to say. And in some ways it's so simple, and we know there's a lot more nuance and complexity. But I hope that they don't feel that they're silenced because I'm lucky enough to be able to maybe, back it up a little bit. And I hope that what we've achieved so far can help those as well.
Thank you so much, Sean, for joining me.
Thank you, Anaya.